extrafamilial harm, childhood exploitation, both be that sexual or criminal, have taken on a new prevalence and prominence, and we've had to adjust accordingly. Quickly taking you through some of the shorter term activities, which hopefully you may have had briefings on before. The ICON programme, which is an innovative one that Hampshire and the Isle of Wight led on nationally over recent years around what in common parlance might be termed shaken baby syndrome. It's around guidance for young parents, parents of any age, around how to take care of their child, especially when a child is of an age where they may be crying. But the ICON programme is as I say, an innovative set of support mechanisms for parents. We've done work around Every Sleep Counts. That's around safe sleeping, the perils of co-sleeping, and it supports the work that's done by our midwife and health visiting colleagues. Work around lurking trolls. Hopefully colleagues will have seen some of the very visual images around lurking trolls. It's an online support and education programme for Key Stage 2. And should anybody wish to attend any of the Lurking Trolls events in one of the troll suits, I'm sure we could accommodate that. We look to make sure that we circulate information and communication, the learning products produced by the partnership, in a timely and effective manner. Work around safeguarding of unborn and newborn babies, and talking to colleagues in Southampton today, across the 4 Hampshire partnerships, Portsmouth, Hampshire, the Isle of Wight and Southampton. There's work going on to further improve and raise awareness around the safeguarding of unborn and newborn babies. I wasn't proposing to go into much more detail other than to say the partnership on the island is, I think, a strong one. We benefit from the partnership with Hampshire, and Hampshire benefits from the partnership with the island, and there's no sense of complacency at all. But as I exit stage left and hand over to Scott McKechnie as the incoming chair, I think Scott will take it on to even further sort of levels of practice improvement, partnership working, and that's the work that's been done over recent years is testament to colleagues in the council, in education, in police, in health, in the voluntary sector. Collectively, partnership, I think, is in a healthy place, and the interests of the children and young people of the Isle of Wight are very much in the forefront of our thinking on a daily basis. Chair, I wasn't proposing to say anything else. Happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Derek. That's it's a very lengthy and good report. Actually, lots of information. So I'll open up to questions. Any questions from anybody? Councillor Downer.
Chair, just looking at some of these figures with the referrals to the MASH going up to 39.30%, and also the number of children early help plans 508. Is that in these unprecedented times? Is that going to be a trend that's going to continue?
Derek or Stuart, whichever.
I'll defer to Stuart. I'll come in a second, Chair, if that's okay.
Chair, thank you, Derek. That 39% seems to have stabilised from the new normal. So it's 39% increase over a 2-year period. And there's lots of reasons for that. Poverty, cost of living crisis, children's mental health. There's almost a pandemic of children's mental ill health, I'm afraid, currently. We've also seen an increase in domestic abuse, an increase in adult mental health. Put all those factors together, that leads to that increase in demand for social care.
Did you want to add anything at all, Derek?
Only just a bit of context beyond the island, if I may. It's numbers aside, that upturn is something we've seen across the country for the very reasons that Stuart's just outlined. So nothing to add beyond that, Chair. Thank you.
Steve.
Two additional points. One is that one of the things that we note is that because children's services isn't a self-generating referral mechanism. It's referred by other partners. So it comes in from police, education, health, other partners. And the proportion of those referrals has stayed relatively static. So in other words, it's still about 25% from the police, but it's just a bigger number, and the proportions have grown. So I think that's quite interesting in and of itself. And the other thing that just to note for members is, at some point in the not too distant future, we're going to be having a discussion about budgets and why there is pressure on children's services budgets. Fine. Simple as that, I'm afraid.
So a question I like to ask, well, I don't like to ask, what I do ask a lot, is what are the things that keep all of you awake at night? Because, this report is excellent. The work you do is excellent, unfortunately, very much needed. But what are the handbrakes and the things that keep you all awake at night?
If I may, Chair, I'll answer that sort of in the round, really. It's where we find ourselves as a society at the moment, as a country, as an economy, and the pressures that we feel as adults. We've talked about the cost of living crisis. I think we're seeing sort of additional pressures on our young people. There are issues around how safe they feel online, how safe or otherwise they feel outside of the home. Stuart mentioned just now around the mental health and well-being of our young people. We've talked about neglect. So all of those things need to be kept in the forefront of our mind. But to counter that is the work I see on a daily basis of our social care, police, health, voluntary sector, education colleagues who do a pretty fantastic job trying to protect and make sure our children and young people are safeguarded. So on one hand, there are causes for concern. On the other, there are always reasons to have measured optimism and assurance.
What keeps me awake at night is our staffing situation. So there's a national shortage of children's social care, has been for several years. That's got worse, undoubtedly over the last 3 years. That's worse, and it is a national situation. The island isn't immune to that. We lose social workers to agencies who then try and sell them back to us at times the cost. There is some work going on nationally about that. I don't have the details of it. But in due course, we're hoping that the Department for Education will make it more attractive for social workers to remain within the local authority. But I have to say, the impact on the workforce by not having constant churn of agency social work vacancies. They're tired, social workers, they're really tired, and that keeps me awake.
If I can just come in, because so this year, it's my privilege to be the president of the Association of Directors of Children's Services. So I get to say some stuff on behalf of all directors of children's services. So I can point to absolutely the fact that what Stuart's just said is you could go from Newcastle to Manchester to Devon to here, and you will hear the same thing, right? And it's a system that is that is overheating and is in difficulty. So what needs to happen are some national changes, but I do have some, I think there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and I don't think it's an oncoming train. So there are some causes for optimism. So there is the independent review of children's social care, as written by Josh McAllister. It's a good report. I'd recommend it to anybody to read. I agree with it. You're never going to agree with one of these reports unless you read it yourself, really. But I agree with about 80% of it, actually. There's a lot of good stuff in there. So we've, as an association, but as your director for the Isle of Wight, we've been pushing government to adopt that as quickly as possible. And we are keen that they respond to that report and put an implementation plan. And I understand that will happen early in the new year. So that's good. That will include a number of measures that will begin to take, when they're implemented, begin to take the strain off the system. There has also been some work being done very rapidly by the Department for Education at our sort of pressing around the workforce crisis nationally. And whilst I can't say too much about that, I can't pre-announce what the government are going to do. I'm optimistic that the measures that they will put in place, and they will consult on that also in early January. I'm optimistic that the measures they put in place will lead to a very significant impact on the way that agencies can operate the workforce. That will then have a significant impact on our ability to attract, recruit and retain staff. I can't really go much further than that in public at this point in time, but I'm optimistic about that. The two other bits that I think still need to be done by government, the one thing that always strikes me is that we have a national plan for this, that, and the other. We don't have a plan, a coordinated plan or a coherent plan for our children. What's our vision for childhood? Next 10 years, 20 years? Got one? We certainly don't have one that incorporates how we address child poverty and the impact of child poverty. But then the final thing that I've been banging on about, if you follow these things, is the impact of the pandemic, and actually it was pre-pandemic as well, on children's mental health. Numbers of referrals to CAMHS nationally have doubled. The number of available treatment beds has halved. The waiting lists are phenomenal. And what does anybody think happens when there is a waiting list of over 50 weeks? Families become distressed, children become distressed, and the family situation breaks down, and then we have to become involved to shore up the family. That is not, I want to hasten to add and to be really clear, that is not the fault of anybody working within CAMHS who are working their socks off. That's not the issue that I'm trying to make here. They're working just as hard. This is about a systemic issue to turn our services for children's health upside down and look at them again in a different way. Here endeth the speech. Sorry, but it's important stuff.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Derek. That was very informative. Any further questions? Rob.
Thank you, Chair. I was just looking at the data on page 41, the proportions of the categories of registration, and I was looking at 2019 up to the 2021-22 data, and neglect appears to have decreased relatively significantly, but emotional abuse looks like it's doubled, and physical abuse quadrupled as a proportion. So is that a concern that neglect has progressed to abuse, or is it another statistical explanation?
Good question. It's not definitive, the categorization of abuse. So sometimes neglect is actually categorized as emotional abuse on the child, and there are various forms of neglect. So I've no doubt that neglect, numbers of children experiencing neglect, increased, not gone now, but the categorization might be slightly different because it is. There's only 4 categories. Frankly, another thing I think Department for Education needs to sort out. A good example of that would be children who are at risk of exploitation on child protection plan under the category of neglect. Parents aren't neglected. The risk is outside the home, but that's the only category really that fits. So it's not a great science.
Thank you, Stuart. Any further questions? No? Well, thank you. Thank you, Derek. Thank you for joining us online. Oh, to Steve.
Let me just say one thing, and it'll probably embarrass Derek, but Derek's stepping down as our chair, or independent chair of the board. He's been our chair for, I think, is it coming up for 6 years, Derek? Maybe even 7?
6 years this month.
And there's a point at which you no longer become independent. So he leaves with our absolute best wishes. He's been an absolutely brilliant chair, and hope he's often come here to present this report. I hope the select committee can send him our best wishes as he goes on to even better things, I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. Okay, thank you for coming along, and thank you for all the good work you've put in over the last 6 years. Enjoy whatever you do next.
Very kind. Thank you very much indeed. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Okay, moving on to the second part of 7, role of the police in child protection. We have Superintendent Amanda Horsburgh.
Yep. Hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm just going to share my presentation. I know some of you have got it on paper. Do you need it shared on the screen, or are you happy for me to just go through it?
We'll have it on paper, but feel free to share if you wish. It's entirely up to you. But we do.
Well, it's never down to me. It's always down to the technology. But hopefully you should start to be able to see that now. Excellent. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just give you some context setting. I know that Derek's already sort of preempted where we're at, but police work in partnership across the whole local authority, children's services, more importantly, and all we want to do is to ensure better outcomes for children. So that's our whole sole purpose, whether that's as policing PLC or whether that is in a broader context of the partnership working. So we're held to account for how we do that, not just through obviously the governance of local partnerships, but also by our own inspectorate, which is known as Her Majesty's Inspectorate. And they come and visit us, and they do specific and focused inspections. And one of those inspections is around child protection. So what I'm hoping to do for you this evening is just to take you through our most recent child protection review, and just outline for you where we're at from that objective inspection, and actually take you through some of our more broader plans around our continuous improvement, which Derek touched on earlier. So that post-inspection visit that took place earlier on in the year, in June. It takes some time for them to gather all of that information, to do the effective scrutiny, to look at the quality, to interview staff. And then they published the full report, and that came out on the 27th of September. So this is the earliest opportunity where I've been invited to come in and do it specifically to you on the Isle of Wight. So overall, the findings were largely positive. There will always be areas for improvement. So that's what brings about any kind of inspection, brings around free consultancy, and gives us an areas where we might have gaps and where we can sort of focus effort in order to improve. So HMIC in broad terms outlined there within their executive summary the commitment into the resources, the time and energy to improve outcomes for children and make improvements in line with their previous recommendations. They applauded the governance and processes were being used, and clear commitment from everybody involved in policing, from a senior level through down to the workers on the ground in relation to child protection, which is largely positive. But that does not leave us to be complacent. So what you're seeing now is effectively a very broad brushstroke of where we are in relation to our governance and how we do that. So what you'll see there is a sort of breakdown of that internal structure, what it looks like. So what you see to the left-hand side, you'll see our child abuse, our internet child abuse teams, and Amberstone, who look after the investigation into sexual offences. And they will deal with your traditional investigations into matters of child abuse, be that online or be that physical. And then on the other side of the chart, what you see there is how we're structured in relation to public protection. And that comes under three key strands, which you'll see at the bottom of the page. That's our multi-agency safeguarding hubs and safeguarding teams, our offender management teams who look after broadly our high-risk offenders that are either on licence and under coordinated management through police and probation. And the lower tier of offender management will see what we call integrated offender management, which effectively looks after burglars, robbers and thieves. But of course, the bit that we're focused on from a child protection perspective are those perpetrators that need management in our communities. And then the other strand we've got is our missing exploited traffic teams, which will look after our high risk and medium risk cohort of children that are vulnerable to either sexual exploitation or criminal exploitation. That piece there, we work very, very closely with local authority and children's services to make sure we have a very joined up approach on how we deal with those children. And then youth offending teams, and more recently we've added to this and introduced education partnership teams, which are a new team and very welcome to come back in to work alongside our education partners in order to prepare and get into schools and back to where we used to be many years ago. So that's a very welcomed addition to the team. And we've also recently introduced NHS strategic partnership role, and that is working effectively with health in relation to the integrated care partnership, where we've seen all those what used to be CCGs come together now under one structure within health. So that's effectively how our structure works within policing. But of course, as I've already said, we don't do this alone. We are very much from a public protection and safeguarding angle. We are absolutely wedded to our role as part of that broader partnership work. So effectively this, what you can see in front of you is our governance structure that we work through to make sure we've got that governance and accountability around how we look after children. But of course, our key involvement is within those local safeguarding children's boards, and the Isle of Wight is no exception to that. So what we've introduced within policing is what we've called our child-centred policing strategy, and effectively that gives us real clear focus around the timeliness that we need to think around how we're dealing with our children. Recognising they are not the same as adults. They don't think the same, they don't behave the same, and they have greater vulnerabilities, and I think we're probably all agreed on that. Recognising the voice of the child and actually bringing that to life. I'm ready about taking every opportunity to listen to the views of children, whether they're presenting to us as victims. Sometimes children can present to us as offenders, and sometimes children present to us as witnesses. We need to know when and how they're being impacted when they're exposed to things such as domestic abuse, whether that is exploitation as a whole, and not really telling them how we think they need to be dealt with, is listening to them about how they need us to help them. Which is a real good gear change and very much welcomed. And then understanding about every interaction is an opportunity. Any interaction with a child from a policing perspective is an opportunity to engage and create a better outcome for that child in whatever shape and form they present to us within policing. So how do we do that? What you're seeing there is our commitment, our delivery plan from a public protection perspective within policing, of our promises of how we are going to deliver and bring to life all of that I've spoke about. So when we move on, you'll see there really we do this through. So what you're seeing here is 4 key strands of how we deliver that. In reality on the ground. So 4 pillars of delivery: people, making sure our processes and systems are right, the performance around improving quality and output, and how we influence change and improve service across that political and partnership space. This is our delivery plan currently from 2022 to 24, quite a visual plan on a page type approach. But I'll go into that just in slightly more detail around some of that short-term and medium-term delivery, which is already in train. So here, what we have to do, if we have to get this right, we have to invest in our people. You've already, Stuart, say around the capacity and capability to deliver across the whole system is stretched. Policing is no exception to that, albeit that you will see the government have given us what they will say a significant uplift, but effectively only brings us back to policing levels that were a few years ago, as opposed to actually any physical uplift. We're still certainly in a period of recovery in relation to that. But that said, we still need to make sure our people are fit, capable to deliver. So we need to make sure we're sighted on that growing demand. So we have completed demand and capacity review across all of our public protection services. We need to make sure our training is absolutely spot on. The world is very complex. There is a shift change in what we're seeing. You've already heard it spoke around increase in mental health across our children and young people. We need to make sure we are fit and we are in the right space to be able to recognise that and respond. So our training is absolutely key. Enabling our teams, that's around understanding what support is needed and making sure we respond. So what you will see is a very strong wellbeing plan for our staff, making sure that we are having and embedding a diverse workforce, where we are very inclusive and where we are absolutely connected to the community that we serve and representative of that. Reward and recognition. We are very keen to adopt, and you'll see that in some of the other stuff I'll touch on going forward, but it's also really important that we recognise the great work that goes on out there day in, day out. So we do establish public protection awards for our staff and across partnerships, and to make sure that we absolutely recognise and celebrate some of the great work that goes on out there. And that's just not internally towards police, as I said. And with everything, that digital investment, you know, how do we use technology to really try to support where we need to go next? So what we've seen is automation of services within our queues, within our MASH, for example, is a good example, whereby we've got automated robotic processes that's constantly scanning what is sat waiting for a physical person to review, to make sure that we are moving the priority jobs to the very, very top, and they get a quicker and more effective service that the risk that they present deserves. So then we've got to move on to our performance, and why is that performance important? We've established this year a new performance framework, and that's so that we can really understand what it is we're seeing. So when you ask questions around whether it's cruelty and neglect, or whether we want to understand what that demand looks like going through our MASH, we're able then to be able to break it down, really understand it, so we can be more evidence-led in where we either put our resources or identify any emerging risks or issues. Quality and scrutiny goes without saying. We've got to make sure that we are ready to be able to identify where things go wrong. We don't want to leave that to a serious case review. That's too far. So constantly wanting to improve the quality of what we're doing. So whether that is reviews of public protection notices, which are the notices that people fill out when they've identified risk in the community, to making sure that they are absolutely telling our partners what it is they need to know in order to put the right service or right intervention in place for that individual. So what we do, we have created an inspection steering group which looks at all of that. We'll look at any inspection work that goes on, any case reviews, domestic homicide reviews, so we can absolutely identify the learning and make sure we hold ourselves to account for embedding that learning and delivering on the recommendations that any kind of review, whether it's internal, external, national, is actually being embedded and brought to life within policing. I've already touched on our child centred policing strategy, so I won't go into that too much further. But our performance is also about identifying how we disrupt the perpetrators. Yes, we are absolutely focused on protecting children, but how do we disrupt those perpetrators? How do we get on the front foot in identifying right to ask, right to know, for example, to letting individuals know that they are effectively with an abusive partner, you know, and being really, really proactive so we can get in there and make sure that we can put the relatively intervention measures and support in place for whatever that risk looks like within our children. I won't go into too much detail here. I've already touched on what the performance framework does and what we're hoping to achieve. But actually, this is about more broadly, how do we share that data across our partnerships? So as a partnership, we are more alive to what it is we're seeing, what it is children's services are seeing, and actually between that, draw together some conclusions and raise that situational awareness at that very local level about what it is we are seeing. Invariably, as Steve has already touched on, we are more likely than not to be seeing stuff that have got a national theme to it. But actually, it's really important we also understand that local context as well, so we can respond more effectively. Partnerships, you know, we don't work in isolation. I see this absolutely as a partnership effort. And that's why this is where we can really start to influence change and improve service. So what we've seen, so some of the key partnership stuff that we've delivered over the last 12 and 18 months, we have been really focused on seeking to understand what it is around child exploitation. So we're working very hard at the moment in order to try and deliver a HIPS wide, and by that what I mean is Hampshire, Isle of Wight, Portsmouth and Southampton multi-agency hub for addressing child exploitation, whether that is sexual or criminal. So that's a very big piece of work, which hopefully we'll see come to life over the next 12 to 18 months. Another area of significant investment, we've already talked about the integrated care partnership, driven by health, but absolutely supported by us. And we have got a senior leader working directly with them at the moment to understand how we make the most of that partnership work. From an education perspective, I've already spoken about our education partnership teams, but we have initiatives such as Op Encompass, which will see us share information when a child has been exposed to domestic abuse in the home or is part of a domestic abuse family setup. That will see us share information directly with schools on within 24 hours of police attending that call. That is really key in order to be able to protect and identify safeguarding risks and understand what's happening with that child from an education setting and within an education setting. We work really well with the Willow team, which is Hampshire team, but actually again linked in with child exploitation. And we also work Op Endeavour, which does a similar thing as Encompass. And what that will see then is actually sharing information of our missing children and working well with that. And then finally, the final strand of delivery is around our process and systems. So Op Encompass, Op Endeavour, I've already spoken about. We also have a custody notification pilot. So what that will see is making sure that we notify children's services as soon as a child comes into custody. Because we, again, going back to what we're saying around the child centred policing strategy, that's around every intervention is an opportunity. And when we have a child in custody, that is a real reachable moment for us and for children's services as well. I've talked around the HIPS child exploitation strategy and hub. Salvus is worth me sort of unpacking a little bit with you. Salvus is how we respond within policing to our missing cohort that are at high risk of child exploitation. If a child goes missing who's within of that high risk cohort, there are mechanisms that swing into action within policing, which is now seen as find, recover, and help that child much quicker than previously. And we've been working really hard with within the police MASH, but more broadly across our partners, to understand the demand that's coming through the MASH. How do we get more efficient within that demand? How do we improve the quality of what we're seeing? And more importantly, how do we get ourselves fit for the future in relation to that rising demand? So just bringing it to a conclusion, really, and actually I'll echo here exactly what Stuart, Derek and Steve has already said. Where are the future challenges for police and for partners? That external influences, so that's around the cost of living, that's around where we are now with our economy. Recruitment and retention, again, Stuart's already touched on this, but actually we are again in the same position. It's a saturated market out there. We are reliant in some roles for agency staff, certainly within our multi-agency hubs. In order to make sure that we can keep things ticking over, which comes at a cost. The whole system demand, which we've already touched on, and then of course, intrinsically linked to the cost of living will be what our public spending capability is going to be look like going forward, which takes us back to the continuous improvement piece, and actually some of those changes that need to take place in order for us to be able to cope, not just in the next sort of 12, 18 months and then in the years to come. So what we're seeing is that rise of picture of vulnerability, complexity and demand needs us to really be focused on that situational awareness, sort of internally from a policing and externally across our partnerships, and really get down to sort of the bones of how we understand and measure harm that we're seeing playing out across the partnerships. So I'll open it up now to any questions. I'll stop sharing my screen so I can see the room. Yeah, if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
Thank you for that. It was a really good in-depth report. I don't think I've seen that many acronyms since I was in an engineering meeting, but it's not meant as a criticism. I realise there's lots and lots of information there. Thank you. Do you have any questions for Detective Superintendent Horsburgh? Councillor Drew. And Councillor Oliver.
Thank you for the presentation. I think that's very eloquent and very detailed. I was just wondering, in terms of what, as a department, would be the biggest regrets you've had over the past 12 months, and what would be your one single wish for the future 12 months? Thank you.
I think I would say is I've been in post for 12 months now, so I'm just coming up to 12 months. So it's a really personal question. When I came in, what we didn't have was a really good understanding of what our data was telling us, whether that was performance data, what the demand was going through our multi-agency hubs, and actually at that point, getting that mechanism in place took some time. That did result in us uncovering some stones within, certainly within our multi-agency hubs, where we saw demand absolutely catapult, which we had not predicted. That is now back under control. But actually, with all of that, gave us some real opportunity of, right, how do we properly shore ourselves up now? How do we have really strong business continuity plans? How do we make ourselves ready for the next wave? Because what we've seen is an increase in demand, and I don't know whether Steve and Stuart will agree with me on this one or not. Increase in demand, which is suddenly become more volatile. It's out of seasonal trends. So my biggest regret is not being able to identify that was going to happen, and actually just and relying on previous years of what our demand profile looked like. suddenly got ripped up at some point, whether that was during COVID or whether that was my predecessor who just ripped it up and threw it away before I came. I'm not sure. But in all seriousness, what that has allowed us to do for the future is for us to be more focused on being evidence led in order to supply the right resources at the right time to make the best outcome for children. So out of that learning in the last 12 months, I think it's put us in a better place going forward. Hopefully that's answered your question.
Councillor Oliver?
Yeah, firstly a statement really. It's nice to see that the constabulary name has actually been corrected after a 20-year odd mistake to include the Isle of Wight, because we should be included in it. Yeah, from there, but also on the agenda, the last part is how local authority councillors can assist. I've heard a lot of stats and everything else. I still don't know how I, as a local councillor on the ground, can assist in what you're trying to put across.
Well, if we're going to make a difference to our children, it's around actually making sure that we've got the right education services to make sure that we are really looking as a community, and I'll involve the councillors in that community. Have we got the right facilities for our children? Have we got the right outlets, the right provisions within the community? Because what we see here and what I deal with is when it goes wrong for our children. But there is a huge cohort of children out there that education, for example, that's their safe space. That is such a massive protective factor in a child's life. So if I could give one wish to you as a counsellor, is if we can get the basics very right for our children within the community in the way of education, whether that's provision of extracurricular activities, that's where I believe the focus should be. And the police and the partnerships can come in behind us and we'll sweep it up for those children that sometimes get, for whatever reason, their circumstances are different. Because our children, I genuinely believe our children really need us, not just now more than ever, but they need adults to be out looking out for them. And actually their safe space outside of schooling can sometimes be online, and I know that isn't the right place for them to be. So it's about the basic provision in the community that you as a counsellor you can bring to life just for the children that sort of live in your community. So that'd be my wish.
That's a good comment. Thank you for that. Any other questions? Councillor Christensen.
I suppose it follows on from that. Thank you, Chair. So is enough being done, and is the multi-agency sort of working? Is that effective? Is there anything better that can be done with that? Thank you.
I'll also invite sort of Stephen Stewart's comment on that as well. I would say I work across all 4 local authority areas. I would say that there are different challenges across those areas for whatever reason. So Portsmouth, for example, as unitary, and Southampton as unitary, that they have different challenges within the cities. What I would say is that Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, for me, is the strongest partnership that we've got. I really welcome the professionalism that is shown across that multi-agency environment. I believe that we have got a good relationship, so there can be healthy challenge. But for me, there is always that will to work together to make sure that we deliver on that common purpose that we've got. That's my assessment on it from a sort of 12 months in and being the new girl on the street still. But I'll extend that invite to Stuart and Steve for their views.
Can't disagree now, can I? No, that partnership working is very strong, the island, and as it is across Hampshire. I think there is more we can do on a multi-agency basis. Personally, my own thoughts are, in the world of children's safeguarding, things have to be multi-agency. No agency has got the capacity to deal with it alone. The independent review of children's social care that Steve referenced talks about that as well, and perhaps strengthening the regulations so that you have more teams like the yacht, where in the yacht you have probation, you have police, and you have social workers. They're required by regulation to create those teams. I think that's exactly what you need for children's safeguarding, so that, you know, whether it's the local authority that runs it or it's the police, likely to be the local, have these multidisciplinary integrated teams, and not just for the heavy end child protection, because actually you need it in the space of early help as well. So more, and I do hope that that will come out of the review department for education.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Downer.
Thank you, Chairman. Just an observation. In your one part of your thing is about treating children as children. Now, and I thoroughly agree with that, but the thing is, it's very difficult for children in this society that we've got today. They're under so much pressure to grow up, and they don't really stand a chance of being actual children. Thank you.
Yeah, good point. Any further questions or comments? No? Feel free, Amanda, to stay for the youth offenders report if you wish. If not, and I've wanted to say this for a while, Detective Superintendent Horsburgh, thank you, that will be all.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Line of duty, but yeah, but thank you very much. It's a really, really interesting report, and thank you for attending the meeting. It's much appreciated.
No problems at all. If there are any further questions that I can answer offline, then please do let me know. But if not, I will go and safeguard my own child now from football training. So thank you. Thank you for the invite. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item 8, youth offending.
Good evening, everyone. So I think you've had reference to the report that was written in advance, and I won't go into it in too much detail, but to just kind of highlight some of the reports and perhaps pick up some of the themes that you've already raised around partnership working and some of the child first kind of principles that we work to. So firstly, just to introduce myself. So I'm Nikki Shave. I am the head of service for both Hampshire and the Isle of Wight youth offending teams. And I just really wanted to say is that we actually do work very much as an integrated service wherever we can. So although it's 2 local authorities, we do tend to have shared learning across the 2 services. But also the first point to make is that the Isle of Wight often lead the way, and there'll be more about that later. So I just really wanted to pick up on, firstly, in terms of the background, the notion of partnership and where that comes in. So youth offending teams were established under the 1998 Crime and Disorder Act, which actually put that very much on a statutory level, the partnership in terms of relating to the signatories to that, which are the local authority, in many guises, the police, the probation service, and in health. I had occasion to work with in this space prior to 1998 when probation had those kind of leads, and very much the partnerships that you had to invoke around children were the ones that they actually then ended up in that kind of formal partnership role. The work is predominantly overseen by the Ministry of Justice through the Youth Justice Board, and they are kind of another partner, if you like, in terms of the way that we work. And in the report, I've just put a link into some of the standards that we work to in relation to the children that we work with. Just to kind of say that yachts have a statutory responsibility for children who are given either an outcome by the court or by our out of court process, which is our joint decision making panel, where they deal with things like cautions and diversionary programmes. But Hampshire and the Isle of Wight are also unique in that we have a youth crime prevention service, which we kind of also oversee, and that is for children predominantly who are on the cusp of reoffending, on the cusp of getting into trouble and offending, and we seek referrals from a whole range of organisations, education, children's services, children and families themselves can also kind of refer in. I'll come back to that because I think one of the things that's really interesting about the profile on the Isle of Wight is around the strength of the youth crime prevention service. We're overseeing, we have an Isle of Wight Youth Yacht Management Board. There's also one in Hampshire. And very much the representatives of those boards are similar in both services. So, people from those kind of key partners that we already mentioned, but also what is very important is that those partners are at a strategic level. These are the people who can actually influence the agenda in terms of the different kind of partners we have. So, for example, education, having the right partners in education around that board, and that right level of representation. We've recently made a decision, both boards made the decision collectively to kind of seek to merge those boards because we think that actually that can give a better kind of oversight on that and avoid some of the duplication that's currently in place. Moving on away from the boards, I just really wanted to talk about how we also work across the other services, the unitary authorities particularly as well, which Mandy kind of also referenced in her presentation, and that is because we have often joint partners in common. And so the police being kind of the most important one. So a lot of the work that we do in relation to our colleagues in police is done across the 4 Hampshire yachts. And that actually kind of avoids some duplication. And it also allows us to share the load, for example, between the 4 head of services. So we share out some of the more pan-Hampshire partnerships amongst us, MAPA management boards, for example, the local criminal justice board, and kind of work in relation to courts. We tend to kind of share out and work very closely and collaboratively together. Moving on then, I just really wanted to talk about on page 79, we are talking about those whole child first principles. We used to have the statement child first, offender second. Recently, we had dropped the offender second. We don't use that terminology at all. It is very much children as children and picking up that point. But actually acknowledging with some of those 17 and 18-year-olds picking up the point the councillor made earlier around children needing to be children is really difficult now, and particularly around those 17 and 18-year-olds, and picking up the point that was made earlier in Derek's presentation around some of the contextual safeguarding issues. So families are very safe, but actually the environment isn't, particularly for those older children, and how you kind of work with those. I won't go into details, but I've listed in the report the 4 tenets of Child First and what that kind of looks like in reality. That is a direct cut and paste from the main document, but it actually looks at how we kind of how we look to work with children, and with the overall objective that they actually reach their full potential. So when they move away from us in 18 and going on in towards kind of young adulthood and further, they actually achieve their best potential, and that's kind of our overall aim. So just in terms of numbers around the team size and the workload, it is a small team, and I've listed there in terms of the staffing establishment that we have, and that is comparable to a Hampshire team and a Hampshire model. What the anomaly is, and I just really wanted to pick up, we have a lot of debate in our management board around our prevention angle. And what we've got on the island, which is an interesting profile, is that the numbers have far exceed any of the referrals that we get for prevention than any of our Hampshire teams. And that is because it's a brand that is really well known, it's really well integrated, and it's really well respected. So we do have a lot of debate around the boards around things like how can we increase the service where the funding isn't there, if you know what I mean. So we have an underspend that we can continually kind of divert back into prevention when that is an issue. But we've recently had some additional monies which actually enabled us to stabilise our prevention service, which I can come back to when thinking about the money. I just really wanted to make that point because it's an anomaly on the island, and it is to do with how integrated I think the team is within partners on the island. So currently working with 81 children. That's the latest figures. That's there on various kind of orders that we have. And I'll put in the appendix the nature of those orders. I won't go into details, but thinking about the things that, and the way that we work with children. Picking up a point is one of our main kind of areas, which we're very proud of, is our restorative justice work that we do, where every child, wherever there is a harmed person, that harmed person is contacted and they are given a view on how they would like to, kind of that child to be treated, but also actually how we can help them come to terms perhaps with some of the harm that might have been done to them, and how they can then enable that child to kind of move on and kind of accept responsibility. It's quite a powerful part of our service that we continue to deliver. Going on to the numbers, I've put there our kind of current budget for 22-23 and where our money comes from, and you will see that is a combination of cash, but also in combination of payment in kind in terms of staffing. So thinking about the cash, we've got the local authority children's services contribution there, Youth Justice Board contribution. We get a contribution from the youth crime, so the Office of Police Crime Commissioner to deliver youth crime prevention. And recently, not in there because this was kind of recently noted, we've also recently been, there's a new programme of spending, of which the island are going to receive an additional £40,000 to deal with that kind of prevention, diversion kind of space there. And turning over to page 81, there is the breakdown in terms of what the monetary value of the payment in kind is. So the money that actually other agencies put in terms of staff. Police is quite significant in that they put into with one police officer. There is some sergeant time, and then there's an overall inspection time, inspector time, which actually kind of comes up to that. Moving on then to looking at our performance, which actually I think we're particularly kind of proud of. I put in our latest data in there. We have 3 performance measures, 3 key measures. The first time is the number of first-time entrants, and that is something that we continually work to kind of try and reduce down to that. And we're actually down to about 23 children in a 12-month period. We do that because we know that actually a criminal justice response to a child's behaviour, which they may automatically kind of grow out, isn't helpful. So we seek to deliver as much interventions that we can without that formal outcome, because we know that that can be significantly, it have a significant negative impact. So that is kind of one of our major kind of areas of work. We do also recognise, though, actually for some children that actually it's not possible, that they do run out of the road, but we don't give up. We still work with them with a goal to reduce their reoffending of those children, which is our second indicator. And we've really kind of worked on that in terms of getting that kind of down there. And I can answer some more questions on that if they're. And also the third one is the numbers of children in custody receiving a custodial sentence. And we've worked on that. It's a little bit kind of volatile at the moment, but in the last 5 years and some significant there's only been 3 children from the island who have gone into and received that ultimate sanction of a custodial sentence. And I've just then gone on to think about some of our the new national indicators that are coming down the line, and these are quite significant. It's quite a significant challenge for us to start measuring those new indicators that we've recently been given. And again, we work very much collaboratively with Hampshire on that. Our performance manager for Hampshire also covers the island, and a day of her time, like myself, is spent kind of on island issues. But we can often, that's where you get the economies of scale, if you like, because you can work on the 2 together and actually implement those. One of the kind of challenges that the team have actually had to face really is that we've been inspection ready for the last 4 years and we still haven't got the call. And for the team, that has been quite difficult. I came in 2018 knowing that that could happen intimately, and we've been in a state of preparedness since. That kind of actually then dropped off a bit, and actually then in the last 12 months, I think, because we've had some changes in staffing, which we've had to then kind of generate and kind of progress through, has meant that, you know, it is there. And so every Thursday for the last 4 years, we've been inspecting a call. A lot of that was to do with COVID and the delays in terms of the inspection programme, but we're still kind of waiting that call. We have been involved in other inspection. We were part of the COVID-19 inspection program, for example, where we were chosen as one of the 7 yachts that they came and visited to look at that. But that's more of a review than an inspection. And finally, I've just given our list of priorities for this year, the things that we're working on. Keeping education, children education is kind of key. We've already talked about that. We've talked about one of the growing evidences around children disproportionately represented from some minority ethnic groups. That's not so much of the evidence isn't so much clear on the island in terms of that, but there is a national driver for that, which we are looking to kind of improve. We're looking at trying to improve how we incorporate the views of children carers into our work, and how to think about how we're looking incest in relation to causing harm of others. And we've made some significant progress already in relation to that one this year. Want to kind of develop our assessments in relation to children health outcomes, and to continue to develop some of the partnership response into looking at serious youth violence, and particularly the youth to adult transition cohort, those children of 17, 18, which again we've referred to before, and looking at kind of how we can better serve and understand the children who commit adolescent to parental violence. So quite a big work plan. A lot of that is kind of where we've been moving forward anyway. A lot of that is things that we will be kind of doing, that we're looking at our priorities. I'll close there and end, but if there's any kind of questions that I can take, very happy to do so.
Thank you. Not only a good report, but some great outcomes. I think last time you came, it was the same. So well done, 2 years running. I think that is, isn't it, in terms of the report being excellent. There's some good outcomes. So questions, Councillor Lever, then Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. That was really good. Just to, I think you mentioned, somebody might pick up on this, but on the performance, the reduction in reoffending, are there specific reasons identified why that's gone down so much?
COVID did have an effect. So the way that the data is managed is that you take a 3-month, all the children that are made under our supervision on statutory way for a 3-month period, and you subsequently then kind of measure over the next 12 months, and then you wait a few months to make sure that actually any delays sort of come through. And so COVID did have a response in that fall, because there was that 3-month period, that cohort where those children weren't out and about in terms of committing kind of offences. So that was an effect. However, even if you take that into account, and the bounce back after that, you are still looking at a significant reduction. I used to attend the management board back in my old role, back in sort of 6-7 years ago, and where we were looking at kind of a reoffending rates of around 60%, which was quite high. You can actually unpick that and think about what that is, but I think our success is also to do with the basics, really. You have a good assessment. You actually really understand the children. You understand the kind of challenges they're facing. You have that assessment then leads into kind of a plan of which you actually identify the things that you need to do in order for that child for desistance purposes. And that's when the partnerships come in and how they kind of inform that plan. And then you deliver those interventions. And that's all underpinned by the ability of the staff to engage with children and the relationship that they have, which I don't think is that for me is the fundamental relationship that you develop. And some children are challenged to get that relationship, that going. So I think it's to do with a really concerted effort of kind of putting those basics into place. But data is data, and there are the nuances around COVID and how that kind of impacted as well. I don't know if that's happy with that answer.
Yeah. I don't know if I've just missed it. Sorry, just to follow up. I don't know if I missed it from the rest of the pack, but what are the challenges to that reoffending rate?
Well, we do quite a lot of analysis every month, and particularly on the island, we're able to do that because the cohorts are quite small. So recently, what we did on a couple of quarters, we looked at so the numbers are really small. Something like 7 children that actually equated to who reoffended in that period. And what we were actually looking at, there was a real theme on the island, which is perhaps different from other local authorities. So these were children who were perhaps they were older children. They were getting into trouble on their own. They weren't offending in groups, which was actually really interesting. A lot of those children had were getting emotionally dysregulated at points where their relationships were under stress, which was quite another interesting thing. So they were faced with challenges in relationships, and some of their natural instinct was to hit out. So these were the nature of the offences, kind of quite common assaults. They could be within kind of a residential facility. They could be within partners, with friends, with peers, all sorts. So we think it's a bit different than Hampshire's or others where you've got groups of children perhaps reoffending together. Having said that, though, I think what the initial kind of why they're coming onto our books in the first place can be much more about group offending. It's the reoffending is very individual, I would say.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ellis. Pass that one round then.
Yeah.
Thank you. Beginning to. Oh, it may be.
Oh.
Thank you. So thank you for your report and for the very hard work that you do. And my question is around restorative justice. I'm very interested in that, as a tool. I think it can be very useful. So I just wondered whether in the last quarter the uptake was 10 out of 27, which is less than half. I wondered if that was indicative of the usual uptakes. Obviously that's only one figure that I've seen there, both locally and nationally, and whether you thought there was room for improvement and if there was anything that could be done. Thank you.
No, that is indicative. It is usually is around for both services around about 20%. So the take up is fairly low, and it is something that we do kind of continue to work in. But it is kind of quite a complex area, and it is I think a lot of it is in the voluntary nature of the engagement, both from our children's point of view and also from the point of view of the harmed person. So and when you're making that, so that's actually often the way. Oh, some harmed persons choose not to and make that deliberate choice. Sometimes they will do. Sometimes I would just say, actually, I'd quite like them to do a little bit of reparation, or I would quite like a letter or an apology. Or we do often, there was a case study that I took to another committee recently where there was a lot of what we call shuttle mediation, where the harmed person may ask a question, they take it to the child then answers that question, and it can demystify quite a lot of those kind of anxieties that people have. So it is indicative, it is a challenge, but it isn't unusual, I would say. We're not an outlier, if you know what I mean. That would be something there. And I think the skill is from our restorative justice officers is to try and engage on a voluntary basis with people, and it's quite a skilled area.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's still a relatively new concept, perhaps, and I think that uptake is quite encouraging. So it wasn't a criticism of the uptake. I think it's quite encouraging. I just wondered if we could sort of get a bit more down the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Christensen.
Thank you. I agree with everything Councillor Ellis says, actually, because I was looking at those figures as well. And would we say that the sort of well-being is sort of enhanced from the process for both the offender and the victim? Yeah, I don't know what the word is that you want to fill that in with. So, following on, I think there could be more done with this. I think this sounds like really promising.
So yeah, absolutely. I spent anecdotally, I spent a couple of weeks ago. We took quite a more in-depth report on restorative justice to one of our Hampshire committees, and absolutely, it's not a new area of work, but it's an area of work which is very impactful. It has been around for kind of 20 years ago, and the Office of Police Crime Commission do invest from the adult side as well. So it is something that is kind of developing. So in terms of the well-being, though, I think what some of the case studies that we look at is from a harm person victim's perspective, is that there is that often that anxiety and that sense of kind of unknown, because they don't know that child or that perpetrator, that person who's on the other side, and in doing that you can often kind of get that kind of ideas of, was I targeted, you know, what did I do, was there anything about me that maybe did they know me? And often that child would say, oh, well, I wouldn't know you if I worked in the street, or I wouldn't do that. So that's kind of, you know, the well-being for that, and also the child, there is that sense of coming to terms with that and actually kind of acknowledging that. Often, though, sometimes the harmed person will be known to the child. So it may be a carer. It could be, we do get a lot of that. And some of the work that we're trying to look to do is to try and kind of develop that kind of work around, you know, people when they've got caring responsibilities. I think there's a link across there to adolescent parental violence, for example, where you might have a parent that might be also be the person. It could be a teacher, for example. We did some work several years ago around the Island Learning Centre, looking at restorative approaches to how that can kind of support that relationship. So often that relationship is ongoing. So it kind of very much depends on the circumstances in terms of that impact, but that would always be a goal to make people feel less anxious and more accepting, and in doing so that child then accepts responsibility, and that can actually impact on kind of their you know, whether they're going to do it again or not.
Councillor Drew. Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, on a per capita basis, how does our income compare to other areas? Are there areas where we should be campaigning potentially for a greater contribution? Is there anything we can do on that score? I'm sure the answer is probably yes to the last one, but just on a comparison basis. Thank you.
I think from the YJB perspective, when they look on their grant formula, it's very much based on children's head of population. So that would be kind of how that worked in. But there was an very interesting debate a few years ago that we had with the Office of Police Crime Commissioner. It wasn't brought by Hampshire or the Isle of Wight, but it was brought by one of our other local authorities who had that very same question: are we getting the same? So we spent a long time rehashing the data, you know, thinking about so what data do we use? Do we use children's offending? Do we overall offending? Is it population, and so on and so forth? And at the end of the day, when they did that, the area that bought the challenge didn't get any uplift, but the Isle of Wight did, which was only a few thousand, but that did make that. So that's just an example of where they is. So it's very much data. So the new money that's coming down is also very much kind of determined by the population and the children in the population. The challenge is the prevention side of things, because there is virtually, you know, that money is in somewhere like Hampshire, you've got a bigger service, so you can actually kind of utilise that a lot more. And someone like the island, that's very difficult to kind of budget for that. So the fact that we've now got 2 full-time equivalent funding going forward is great. But I would suggest it is very fair, and we can and do challenge when we need to.
Any further questions? No, feel free to stick around for the performance and Mum's input. If not, feel free to shuffle off. Back then to item 6, performance and budget. Who's taking? Oh, Kim's taking. Thank you, Kim.
To work? Yes, I have. I know that Stephen, Stuart and Mandy to some extent have touched on some of the reasons for our increase in demand, so I don't intend to repeat that. And I'll take you briefly through some of the key headlines. So, as we've already said, demand continues to rise across social care, and we've particularly seen a rise in early help assessments for children, and which is our pre-statutory social care work. And some of the prevalent factors for those early help assessments are exactly the same as reflected in our referrals. It's around child's emotional and mental health and well-being,
We're seeing an emerging picture of children who have developmental delay, and we think we understand the activity behind that. We think perhaps that's linked to the lockdown and children not accessing nursery and school provision. And we've seen a significant increase in adult mental health as well. So we think that helps us to understand some of the activity behind the increase in early help. We particularly saw a rise in requests for early help assessments in September of this year. Steve and Stuart have already touched on some of the challenges around staffing and the vacancy rates on the Isle of Wight in our frontline social work teams. So operating in a quite a difficult context, a challenging context. But despite that, I'm very happy and very pleased to report that our performance remains consistent. And I'll go on to talk through some of those slides. So in slide 3 in your pack, you'll see the increase in contacts through the multi-agency safeguarding hub. I know Stuart talked about that stabilising, but it's remained consistently high in comparison to pre-COVID contacts into the multi-agency safeguarding hub. And if you look at the slide, and I referenced this in our meeting in June, you can see the 3 vertical grey bars, which are the national lockdowns, and you can see the activities kind of post and pre and post lockdown. And you can see the increase has continued since then. So that converts those contacts, the percentage of those contacts convert to referrals. And again, on slide 4, you can see how our referral rate has increased. There was a bulge in referrals in Q4. And to go back to a really interesting comment that Mandy made, actually, that reflects our activity in terms of referrals. She talked about seasonal trends. And what we would usually see in our referral rates is when there's school holidays, our referrals go down. We haven't particularly seen that over the last year or so, and business has remained high, and contacts and referrals have remained high. Despite that, if you look at our assessment compliance rates, we've remained above 90%. Of those assessments are completed within 45 days. And it's one of the key targets that we're measured against and that we report on. So as well as meeting the compliance rate, it's really important for children because it means they're being seen, they're being assessed, and interventions are being delivered in a timely way. So that's positive. In relation to our child protection planning, you can see the trajectory there. There's been an increase, lots of reasons for that, and we've touched on a number of them so far, and I don't think there's any point in repeating that. At the close of play yesterday, we had 188 children who were subject to child protection plans. We'd expect to see that rise in line with the increased demand. And our modelling and our predicting suggested that would happen, and it's happening. Our children in need numbers have plateaued. As we talked about earlier, our caseloads remain fairly high because of the level of demand in comparison to the staff that we have in post, but we're managing those cases well. I looked after children numbers. You can see the trajectory in the line there. And I've just touched on caseloads on slide 9. So those caseload averages have increased. Despite the increase in demand and the nature of the work that we're doing, we have some really good quality assurance processes in place. So we complete our case file auditing every month, and that's taken place at all levels, really. So our assistant team managers are involved in that, team managers and the service leads, service managers. Not only that, those audits are then benchmarked by senior managers. So it's a really good process, and it helps us to get a really good window into social work practice. So in Q2, 34 case file audits were completed, and it sets out some narrative there around what those audits found. But again, good performance pretty much across the board in terms of what the audits were telling us. I'll touch slightly on our children in care numbers. and there's been a bit of movement there. We are mandated to take unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and more recently, the numbers that we have to take have increased, and that has affected our children in care numbers. We're working really, really hard to look at how we try and keep children safely at home, but subsequently some children have to come into care despite our best efforts and the work that we're doing. So there were 270 children in the care of Isle of Wight Council in August, in Q2, a reduction from 285 in August 22 alone. But as I said, that's gone up a little bit again since, because we've taken a number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. And I talked last time about those children being placed off island because of the nature of their needs and their differing needs, and how they may be best met in other places. And that's worked really well. So there's a shortage of skilled foster carers on the Isle of Wight. And we're doing a lot of work around trying to recruit foster carers to look after our looked after children. We have to use residential placements for children because we can't meet their complex needs on the island sometimes. And Steve's talked about the placement sufficiency, some of the challenges around having to place children off island in really costly placements. Despite that, in terms of performance, our children, one of the things we're measured against is how many times children have to move placements. It's about placement stability. So the number of children with 3 or more placement moves has decreased, and that reduces the need for placement moves. There's good work going on between our placement commissioning team, our fostering team and children's team, and we're working really hard to match children to the right carers. We've talked a little bit about the challenges around placements. We've developed a really good commissioning framework for supported accommodation for young people post 16 and 17, and for care experienced young people. And the Pathways to Independent Adult was developed with young people as an action from the Corporate Parenting Board. Our current challenge, particularly here on the island, is the providers are meeting the needs of the young people to the point where they're ready to actually move on to independent living, but then we're struggling to identify affordable accommodation that they can then transition to. So there's work going on around that, but it remains a challenge for us. And some children are not, young people are not moving on at the point when they're ready to do so, because we literally have nothing else to move them on to. The financial cost is significant, and I don't intend to go into the detail. It's set out in the paperwork. What we're doing to try and address that, we're working really closely with our Hampshire colleagues who are well down the line in terms of the work they're doing under their modernising placements programme. As I said, we have some really good skilled foster carers on the island that we're able to tap into, but they're an ageing population. And they're at the point where they're no longer able to foster. So we're really working hard on recruiting foster carers. Steve touched on the increase in working with young people with really complex, challenging behaviour and mental health needs. So we're doing really high-level targeted recruitment for those teenagers to try and keep them on island. We're also looking at bespoke training packages for our foster carers, particularly around that older age group of young people. We're looking at the skills fees and how we remunerate them for the work they do. So it's a really big piece of work. As I said, Hampshire are well down the line in terms of the work they're doing. So we're taking some of the learning from what they've done, and they're supporting us with our modernising placement programme. So lots of work going on. To go back to something that Steve said earlier, and I don't think we're really seeing the full extent of the pandemic on families, but I think we're starting to see some emerging themes. I think the whole context in which children are living has changed, and we're seeing that, and the impact on families, compounded by the cost of living crisis. and a myriad of other factors really. So demand remains high. The challenges around staffing remain, but despite that, and I think as senior leaders, we're dipping in and out of social work all the time, looking at the work that's being done, and we are really proud of the work that's being done and the quality of the work that's being done with families. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I mean, not just a full of information report, but very clear report and very clear outcomes there. So thank you for that. It's really interesting. I'm not going to ask you what keeps you awake at night, because I think you've got far too many things that would. Yeah, and I think that's why I'll tell you what keeps me awake at night, and this is probably going to sound more like a statement to start with, but it is the lack of foster carers, and it is the lack of accommodation for people moving on. And I know that's not just the island that's suffering from that, but we seem to be going nowhere. Now, I'll get to the question at the end, but it's probably something that a conversation I need to have with Steve at some point. Is every time we go to our Section 151 officer about building homes or houses, we have to show a return of 5 or 6%. We're not allowed to include these costs. They don't show anywhere in that business plan. So it's some way of finding a way of saying, look, that's great. You know, we're going to save a significant amount of money moving on. But the question is, and I'll let you answer that, Steve, is how can we help?
I'd just start on this one. I think the key to this is more foster carers. I'm not sure it's building more residential homes. Residential homes, devil's own job. Oh, I see. Beg your pardon. I'm sorry. My mistake. Okay. So the key, right? Okay. Rewind. Right. The key to it still is we get more foster carers. So, and just a little plug. There's going to be, if they've not already started, I've signed off some radio adverts that you'll hear on Isle of Wight Radio about foster care for us, because we need to grow our capacity. And what's slightly obscured in the slide around modernising placements is that what we know about foster carers is what inhibits them coming forward is about the support that they get. So what we are doing is growing that support, and we're going to adopt some of the models we've tried in Hampshire. That partnership, you can try something over there, it doesn't work, you don't have to do it. Now we know that it works, actually we can bring it over here. And that's what we call in Hampshire the Hampshire hives. We'd have to call it the island something. Can't think of what they are. There's got to be the island igloos. Yeah, there's got to be an alliterative thing there that we use that gives foster carers support so that they feel valued, because it isn't actually about the money. Well, I mean, the money's important. It's always important, but it's not primarily about the money, about the support. And it's also about the recruitment. So that's, I think, right. But in housing terms, the move on is an issue. I can't vouchsafe where we need to go with that in terms of house building. Is probably beyond my knowledge, let alone my pay grade. But it is something we need to address as an island community about where we build houses and how quickly.
It was really, and we'll have this conversation offline, but it's really what the cost is of not moving people onto independent living, because that really does help build a picture. But thanks, Steve, that makes things a lot clearer. Thank you for that.
If I can just add to that, it's part of a much larger piece of work that actually comes under Councillor Stevens' portfolio, and I'm working collaboratively with Councillor Stevens on a project called More Than Homes, which specifically looks at providing quality accommodation for care leavers. And I think that's the important point. And one of the things that comes out most in our Bright Spots survey every year, which is our survey of looked after children and care leavers, well, care leavers, it's the quality of the accommodation that they move on to. But we are actually looking at that as part of a bigger piece of work. Thank you.
Thanks, Cassandra. Any further questions?
Thanks, Chair. I was just looking at the caseloads graph, and I'm aware that obviously in caseloads, I imagine, leads to stresses on staff and downturn in cases and so on. Is there a limit at which you'd be concerned about caseloads reaching, or are you seeing potentially the caseload's going to come down, or what's comment further on that data? Please, thank you.
What's interesting about it, and you've got it, data. You look at the slide that says all cases open. Actually, the number of cases open is slightly decreased. What you've got is an increase in case loads, and what that tells you is that's because when you divide the cases, you've actually got fewer staff. So the thing that we are really trying to attack, and I can't announce just yet, but it will be, Kim and I spoke about it this morning, we need to recruit and retain staff because it's a numbers. The more staff we have, and we can spread those cases out across more staff. And we are taking active measures to do that, both in things like pay and conditions, so about the mix of staff, and that will be going out to that. Because we are at the level. We're always concerned. I want lower caseloads for staff to do even better work, and that's what we've got to try to achieve. But what you can't do, you cannot turn the tap off of the flow of referrals in. The only way to do that is to increase staff and the quality of staff. We've got the issue. We've got to maintain that quality.
Any further questions? Excellent. So moving on, thank you for that. Thank you. It's, again, very clear, very nicely done. And I know you all feel you've got a never-ending task and a lot of work to do, but thank you for presenting the outcomes in that way. It's much appreciated. Okay, committee's work plan. Everybody had a chance to have a look? Anything to add? Councillor Oliver quite rightly mentioned about recruitment of governors, which we need to make sure stays on there. Anybody got anything else to add? Question? No, good. Moving on. Any questions from members that haven't already arisen? Councillor Ace.
Sorry, is this members' questions now, or are we still on the work? Sorry, thank you. Sorry, that's my. Fine, it's nearly home time. I've got a question, please, for Councillor Andre, around the financial implications of the decision on Tillotson and Rookley School. So I've sort of got two questions, but they kind of come into one, if that's okay, Chair. So one is, how much is putting off the decision cost the council? So by that I mean the original decision as to whether or not to close the school or to keep it open, where we find ourselves at now, which is that in all but name the school is now closed. How much has that cost? How much of a positive or detrimental financial impact would that have for the council, local authority and the school itself? And how long do you envisage this arrangement lasting, i.e. if the parents take up the offer to keep their children on roll at Tillotson and Rookley, but they go to God's Hill, you've got children in year 3, 4 and 5, do you envisage that this arrangement will last until the current year 3 child has finished primary education? And it's kind of the impacts of that, and also related to that, sorry, I appreciate this is quite convoluted, but it will all make sense in the end. Relating to that, in the meantime, while we're waiting to get to a point where, you know, if other people join, I mean, this could end up being like a never-ending thing. So will there be a review? And ideally, would there be a review before the budget is set next year? So it's around the financial implications, and it would be really helpful, please, if we could understand the process of when there'll be a review. Thank you.
So I just start on the finances, because it is it's governed by a set of rules. So the school submits their outturn on the 31st of March every year. That's been done. So they won't do it again till 31st of March. So I cannot say at this stage exactly how much difference there is between decision to now. My instinct is it's not very much, if any, at all, because 90% of what schools spend is on staffing, and they haven't changed their staffing from. I don't think there's any. My anticipation would be very little different at this stage. But I caveat that it only comes in on the 31st of March. Okay. The other point about how long is a piece of string, in my view, because what we don't have is a teacher. if we were able to recruit, we won't stop trying, but if we're able to recruit a teacher, then well, more accurately, the school can reconsider that. But recruitment and retention, you've heard Kim talk about it. It's an island-wide public sector problem, and there's no doubt about that. And it's not just teachers, it's social workers, other public sectors that need to not don't know when. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Sorry, may I follow up to that, please? Thank you. So, sorry, to be clear then, are we possibly potentially looking at the school staying open whilst we could wait endlessly and hope that we do manage to recruit a teacher? I know that there are 4 other primaries currently trying to recruit, also having difficulties. Completely understand how difficult it is. I'm not, I do understand that, but my concern is around the uncertainty again. If we're leaving it sort of open-ended again, what's happening? We haven't kind of solved a problem, and I appreciate. Thank you for trying to solve a problem. I'm just wondering if there'll be an end to it.
Firstly, I'd just like to clarify that the school is not closed. So it remains, it still has an Ofsted number, it's still open, the school is not closed. But I would also like to stress, as I said at the beginning, this is part of a larger piece of strategic place planning, and it wouldn't be appropriate to look at Chillerton and Rookley in isolation, because it's not in isolation. And that's going back to the chair's question originally about how we've moved on from there, is we are very, obviously Chillerton and Rookley is part of those discussions, but as part of a strategic school place plan.
Councillor Julian, Councillor Christensen. I don't care. I said it in that order. Go on, get that one.
Straight on. So, bearing that in mind, would we be supportive of closure and some others looking to form their own academy and do a sort of model of excellence there? Would we be looking at all options going forward?
It's not a question of us being supported. The academy has to be approved by the Regional Schools Commissioner. Went round this loop previously. There is no application in to the Regional Schools Commissioner to expand any existing academies on the island. That includes the island. Regional Schools Commissioner may consider it should they put an application in. Tell you they have not put an application in. That's where we got. Yes.
So if they wanted to put an application in, they could. It's a group of people.
No, that's a free school. If you want, you try that. I think I'd be very surprised if that would be successful. An existing academy put in an application to the regional schools to become a multi-academy trust. They to meet a whole range of criteria, and that would be decided by the regional commissioner, not by the local authority.
Yeah, it's just good to have that confirmed, what the whole process is for public that are concerned about it, those that want to save the school and see a future in.
Well, that detail was in the previous report that came to council. It was all set out very clearly.
Thank you, Chair. So apologies if this is a crass question as a neophyte to the committee, but in terms of the financial justification, am I right in thinking that keeping the school open while children don't attend will cost taxpayers money? And ultimately, what is that cost? And as a follow-up to that, just to get my questions out of the way, if the governors decided to step away, and again, apologies for my imperfect understanding, but if they decided to step away to defederate, what what is then the implications of that?
The first question about taxpayers, so essentially, most school funding is per capita. So 10 children got X amount, and that would be what you would need to have to pay the cost of the teacher and all the infrastructure and all the rest of it. That, because those children are, the school is not closing, as Councillor Andre says, that revenue continues to come in. It will then be directed to the other school site, or whatever happens in the. But the majority of school funding is per capita. So this is a numbers game in that regard. Lost the second half of the question, sorry.
So in terms of defederation, what would be the implications, legal or just in terms of the, the practical implications as well?
It's a decision for the governors. Practical implications would be, I mean, it's a bit hypothetical, isn't it, really? It just split it into two, and but I'm not quite sure where you're going with that.
Well, I was, for example, I mean, presumably there are issues with responsibilities under the Care Act, and what would be the position? I mean, ultimately, you can't have a situation where you are potentially turning people away when perhaps they have a statement, for example, and there needs to be decisions made on those sorts of practical issues.
I've broken it, yeah. If you defederate, of course, you have to have 2 head teachers rather than 1. You have to have 2 safeguarding leads rather than 1. You have to have 2 Senkos rather than 1. So the reasons that I'm assuming the governors federated was to create economies of scale. Defederate, you lose those economies.
So costs will go up essentially. The application. Yeah, and just to, in terms of what you said, going back to that first point, in terms of the costs. I mean, presumably there is material cost for the building, which would be a saving. So that represents a fiscal burden to the taxpayer, notwithstanding the fact that, obviously, as you say, it follows the child. It's per capita cost bereavement, as it were, but it's still a saving potentially. It's something that we could avoid for the material cost of keeping a school open. I'm not advocating necessarily that we do, but there are fiscal implications.
Don't forget that as I said, they're on the margins because even things like heating and so forth is fairly minimal. Schools, it's 90% of school budget is on stuff. That's the thing I always remember. That's what it comes down.
Thank you, Chair. It's still on the Chillerton scenario. I've got a couple of questions on it, I have to be honest. But what is your response to, as I've seen in the press today, that the parents are apparently saying that they're going to refuse to abide by going to alternative schools. What is your response to that?
Well, I think we've made it quite clear that they will still be able to have their children on the roll of Chillerton and Rookley, but parents that choose to stay on the roll will be offered God's Hill. But at the end of the day, it's parental choice. So if they do choose to stay on the roll, then they have been offered places at God's Hill. But parents are free to choose any school on the island.
Sorry, that didn't quite answer the question. In as much as there is going to be no teaching facility at Chillerton come the new year, and the parents are saying they're not prepared to move their children anywhere else. So now that child is now untaught, either kept at home or sent to a school which is closed.
Broken. I think we need to differentiate between the school and the building. The site, the building will be closed, but the school will retain its Ofsted number, so it's not an option. But a lot of these decisions, as we've heard, are down to governors and not necessarily within the gift of the local authority. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to be clear. I don't know if Steve
Well,
wants to add some clarity.
Only in that children have a right to education. That right should be pursued. Parents have choice about where they and how they educate. I'm getting less comfortable about talking about the children because there are only 10 of them, and we shouldn't be in a public from identifying individual children. We're getting quite close to that. So I think what should happen next is what is planned to happen next, which is that all those individual parents, those 10 parents, have individual conversations with the teacher, or they've already had them, and then make plans accordingly. I think beyond that, I'm a bit close to, I think we're a bit close to getting into individual.
But it's one of those things at some stage, we've got to make an uncomfortable decision. We've got an excess of places. We probably, in theory, could close 5 or 6, probably 8 schools even. We're asking at least 4 other schools to take a third reduction in there. And you've already said that's going to affect their budgets going forward. So somewhere along the line, we have to make an uncomfortable decision. There's no question about that. A school with no pupils and with no teacher, it's an empty building. Somewhere along the line, it has to be taken. And I know it's not, no one wants to say that we've got to close that. But I don't want to get too specific about Chillerton itself, but only one child lives in Chillerton at that school. And we've got to now make, somewhere along the line, as a council or as a cooperative, we've got to make that decision to say, hey, hang on a minute, we don't need those spaces, and we won't need those spaces for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, but that was the question I raised very early on. That was the point of asking what the next steps are around place planning, because that's what we need. After the heads came and said, and the governor said, there's too many places. So that hopefully you've already answered that, as in that's what's next.
Just to say, I absolutely agree with Councillor Oliver. We do need to take those difficult decisions, but we do need to do the due diligence before we take those decisions with a strategic, in-depth place plan, which is what we are in the process of doing, so that we actually get it right for our island children. And it's our island children that are at the centre of this. So thank you. I do agree with you.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? No, very good. Normally in a room that's this cold, meetings don't last very long, but that's been quite a long one by my standards. But I think it's because there's such a good quality of information. So thank you to all of you that presented, and thank you for the question, and thank you to the members of the committee as well for keeping it non-political and on message. So enjoy your Thursday evening. I don't know if there's any football on or anything to watch, but please enjoy yourselves. See you soon.